The wind swept down from the mountains, carrying with it the bite of winter and the echoes of a life that could never be left behind. In a small cabin nestled against the endless ridges, a young woman found shelter beneath the roof of a mountain man, silent, rugged, and hardened by years of survival against the wild. His hands built walls strong enough to keep out the cold. His fire kept the night at bay, but nothing could silence the shadow that clung to her heart. The ghost of her stepfather's cruelty followed her into every corner, whispering doubts, stirring fear, and reminding her that some wounds do not vanish with distance. He had given her a place where the snow could not reach, where the wolves dared not linger, and yet she lay awake at night, staring at the beams of the cabin's ceiling, waiting for footsteps that no longer came. Memories have a way of haunting louder than reality, and though she knew she was safe in the arms of the mountain, her spirit trembled as though chains still bound her. Safety is not always the absence of danger. It is the courage to believe you deserve it. The mountain man, for all his silence, carried a watchful strength. He saw her fear in the way she flinched at the creak of the wood, in the way her hands lingered on the door latch before sleep. He did not ask, for words were not his trade. But each day he cut more wood for the fire. Each evening he left the lantern burning a little longer, as if to tell her that in this place, darkness had no dominion. Still, he knew the fiercest battle was not with the cold or the wilderness. It was with the shadows that trailed her heart. For in the West, dangers came not only from the land or from men with rifles, but from the past itself. A cruel voice can linger like a curse, and no wall of pine or stone could keep it from slipping through the cracks. She feared that one day, even here, the shadow of her stepfather would reclaim her, rob her of the fragile peace she had begun to taste. And yet, the mountains have a way of testing every soul that dares to dwell within them, forcing truth to the surface where it can no longer hide. So, as the snow deepened and the nights stretched longer, the question grew heavier than the winter air. Could the shelter of a mountain man be enough to silence the echo of cruelty? Or would the shadow of her stepfather find a way to live on inside the cabin, poisoning even the one sanctuary she had left? The answer, as the West always promised, would come not in comfort, but in fire, blood, and the courage to face what hunts you long after you've escaped. The days passed slowly in the cabin, each sunrise a fragile reminder that life in the mountains was not just survival. It was a test of spirit. The mountain man moved with purpose, cutting wood, mending fences, and hunting game in silence, his actions saying what his words never did. She was safe here. Yet every night, when the fire burned low and shadows stretched across the walls, she felt the stepfather's voice in her ear, sharp as a knife. It was not the wilderness she feared. It was the ghost of cruelty that lingered within her. She carried that fear in her body, in the way she startled at the slam of the shutters when the wind grew fierce, in the way her hand trembled when she touched the old scar on her arm. The mountain man noticed, but did not pry. His respect for silence was born from his own battles, battles carved deep into his rugged face and weary eyes. Still, he knew the mountains never allowed a soul to hide for long. The land stripped men bare, forcing them to confront what they carried inside. One evening, as snow fell thick against the cabin, the storm outside seemed to summon the storm within her. She broke down by the fire, her voice shaking as she confessed what she had long carried in silence. The nights of terror under her stepfather's roof, the endless fear that she would never be free. Her words poured out like a river bursting its banks, and for the first time, she allowed herself to be seen not as a survivor of the wilderness, but as a survivor of cruelty. The mountain man did not interrupt. He sat beside her, his massive frame quiet as stone, his eyes fixed on the flames. When she finished, the silence between them was not heavy but steady, like the ground beneath their feet. He finally spoke, his voice low and rough. The past rides behind you, but it cannot ride forever. One day you'll turn and face it. His words were not comfort, but a truth as sharp and unyielding as the mountain air. That night, she slept more soundly than she had in years. Not because the shadow was gone, but because she had spoken it aloud, given it shape. The mountain did not erase her pain, but had begun to teach her the first lesson of the West. Silence can protect you for a while, but only truth can set you free. The following weeks tested both of them. Winter in the high country was merciless, each day a battle against snow that swallowed fences and ice that split timber. The mountain man faced it with quiet resolve, his body moving like part of the wilderness itself. She, too, labored, hauling water, tending the fire, learning that strength was not born in defiance, but in persistence. And yet, beneath each small victory, the stepfather's shadow remained, whispering that peace could never last. It came in moments she least expected, when she looked into the dark woods and imagined footsteps chasing her, when the wind rattled the shutters and her breath caught in her chest, convinced it was him. Fear, she realized, does not vanish when distance grows. It hides, waiting, ready to strike when the heart falters. The mountain man knew it too, though he spoke little. His silence was not indifference, but recognition, the kind of silence a man carries when he knows ghosts of his own. One bitter night, as the snow piled high, a knock rattled the cabin door. Her blood ran cold. No one came this deep into the mountains without purpose, and her stepfather's shadow leapt alive in her mind. The mountain man rose, rifle in hand, and opened the door to find a traveler collapsed in the snow, half frozen, desperate, mumbling words of warning. Riders, searching, not far behind. The woman's heart clenched. She did not need to hear more to know who haunted those riders. The traveler was given shelter, his frozen hands warmed by the fire, but his words lingered like a storm cloud. The stepfather had not vanished in a memory. He was alive, still hunting, still determined to drag her back into chains of fear. The cabin that had been sanctuary now felt like a beacon, its smoke rising into the sky, a signal to the darkness that she had not escaped after all. The mountain man looked at her, his jaw set, his voice firm. If he comes, the mountains will answer. His promise was not of violence, but of certainty. The West had its own way of punishing cruelty, and the stepfather would learn that the wilderness did not bow to men who thrived on fear. The woman shivered, torn between terror and hope. For the first time, she realized the shadow was no longer hers to face alone. The warning hung in the cabin like smoke that refused to clear. She could not shake the thought of riders closing in, of her stepfather's cruel eyes searching the horizon. Each creak of the floorboards set her heart racing. Each gust of wind through the chimney sounded like footsteps drawing nearer. Yet, the mountain man remained steady, moving through the cabin with calm strength, as though nothing in the world could shake him. His silence was not carelessness. It was a shield, protecting her from being consumed by fear. But in the stillness of the night, doubt gnawed at her. What if the stepfather's cruelty was stronger than the mountains? What if even here, in the wild heart of the West, she could never be free? She remembered the nights when she was younger, when she prayed for the walls of her old home to collapse and bury the monster inside. Those memories came back like ghosts, whispering that she would never truly escape his grasp. The mountain man noticed her sleeplessness, the way her eyes darted toward the window with every sound. One evening, he sat across from her, his face illuminated by the glow of the fire. "Fear grows when you feed it," he said, his words slow, deliberate. "The land teaches us. Storms come, storms pass. But if you run from them, they will chase you forever. If you stand, they break." His words cut through her trembling thoughts, planting a seed of strength she did not know she still carried. The next day, she followed him into the forest. The air was sharp with cold, but he led her higher into the ridge, where the trees opened to a view of the endless valley below. "Look," he said, pointing across the horizon. "This land is bigger than any man's shadow. Remember that." The sight stole her breath, the vastness of the world stretching farther than fear itself. For the first time, she understood that her stepfather's cruelty was small compared to the expanse of the earth that now sheltered her. Still, as they descended back to the cabin, a new truth settled heavy in her heart. If her stepfather was indeed coming, he would not only test her courage, but the very walls that had become her sanctuary. And when that moment came, she would no longer be able to hide behind silence. She would have to stand, just as the mountain man had said. The snow deepened, and with it came the certainty that the stepfather's shadow was drawing closer. Tracks appeared near the tree line, too many for wild deer, too heavy for stray travelers. The mountain man studied them with a hardened expression, his eyes narrowing as he traced the direction. "They're circling," he muttered, his voice low, like the growl of a distant storm. Her chest tightened. The safety she had found within the cabin walls now felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. Each sound outside seemed to promise his arrival. She could almost hear his voice, that sharp, cruel tone that had once ruled her every waking moment. Yet this time, something inside her shifted. She was not the same girl who had cowered under his roof. She was different now. The mountains had taught her resilience, and the mountain man had shown her what it meant to endure. One evening, as the fire burned low, she whispered what had weighed on her heart. "If he comes, I don't know if I can face him." Her words trembled in the air. The mountain man looked at her, his gaze steady, unwavering. "You don't face him alone," he replied. "But understand this, the land has given you a choice. Either you let him own you forever, or you stand and claim yourself." His words were not soft, but they were the truth she needed. That night, she lay awake, her hand resting on the wooden floorboards, feeling the strength of the cabin beneath her. This home had been built with rough hands and unyielding effort, a sanctuary carved from wilderness. She realized then that her life could be built the same way, with scars and sweat, with endurance and defiance. The shadow might arrive at her door, but this time, she would not open it with fear. By dawn, smoke rose steady from the chimney, a signal to anyone watching from the trees. It was not a call for help. It was a declaration. She was no longer running. Whatever came from the past would find her waiting, not in terror, but in the strength the mountains had given her. And in that silence before the storm, her stepfather's shadow felt weaker than it ever had before. The silence of the forest grew heavier with each passing day, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. The woman no longer trembled at every sound, but her heart still carried the weight of what was coming. Each time the mountain man returned from scouting the ridges, she searched his eyes for answers, but he spoke little. His silence was not avoidance. It was preparation. The wilderness had taught him that storms never announce their arrival. They simply break, and only those who are ready endure. On the third night, the horses arrived. Their hooves struck the frozen ground like war drums, carrying the echo of menace through the valley. The woman's breath caught in her throat as she peered through the crack of the cabin shutters. Dark figures moved against the snow, their shapes blurred but unmistakable. And, at the front, she saw him, her stepfather. Older, heavier, but still cloaked in the same cruelty that had haunted her for years. His presence was proof that shadows could cross mountains. Her knees weakened, and for a moment she felt the old fear surging back, that familiar helplessness of a child trapped beneath his rage. But then she felt the cabin floor beneath her palms, strong and unmoving. She lifted her gaze and saw the mountain man, rifle in hand, standing tall by the door. His presence steadied her trembling heart. She realized that this time, she was not a powerless girl. She was a woman standing on land that had chosen to protect her. The riders called out, demanding she be returned. Their voices carried arrogance, but beneath it lay uncertainty. They had expected an easy capture, not resistance. The mountain man's voice cut through the night, calm but sharp as steel. "She does not belong to you. Leave now, or the land itself will cast you out." His words rang out like judgment, and even the forest seemed to grow still. The stepfather laughed, a cruel, bitter sound. "You think you can hide her behind your walls? She'll always be mine." His words slithered into her ears, trying to bind her once more in chains of fear. But this time, something inside her broke free. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "I'm not yours. Not now. Not ever again." For the first time, the shadow recoiled. The stepfather's laughter died in his throat at her words, though his sneer remained. He spurred his horse forward, but the mountain man raised his rifle with steady hands, the barrel glinting and the firelight spilling from the cabin door. The other riders shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. They had heard stories of the mountain man, the quiet giant who feared neither blizzard nor beast, and now those stories felt alive in the frozen air. The woman's heart thundered as she stood beside him. Every instinct screamed for her to retreat, to hide, but she remained rooted to the spot. She realized that survival was no longer enough. To break free from the shadow, she had to confront it, even if her voice shook, even if her knees trembled. The mountains had not sheltered her, so she could remain a prisoner. They had prepared her for this very moment. The standoff stretched into silence, broken only by the howl of the wind. The stepfather snarled, trying to regain control. "You've grown bold hiding behind him," he spat. But the woman shook her head. "I'm not hiding," she answered. "I'm standing." Her words rang louder in her chest than in the air, but they carried a force that no cruelty could erase. For the first time, she saw fear flash in his eyes, not of the mountain man, but of the strength he no longer controlled. The riders shifted again, their loyalty cracking beneath the weight of uncertainty. They had followed the stepfather for coin, for promises of dominance, but they could see the tide turning. The mountains loomed behind the cabin, vast and eternal, as if siding with the woman who had found her voice. The stepfather's shadow, once so large, now seemed small against the scale of the wilderness. And in that moment, the woman understood the truth the mountain man had tried to teach her. Storms do not destroy those who stand. They reveal who is strong enough to endure. The storm of her past had finally broken, and though the battle was not yet over, she no longer felt afraid of the man who had once ruled her life. His shadow had shrunk beneath the light of her defiance. The stepfather's face twisted with rage, his pride wounded by the defiance of the woman he once controlled. He barked an order to his riders, but hesitation gripped them. The fire in her voice and the stillness of the mountain man unsettled them more than any threat of bullets. The wilderness teaches men to recognize when they stand on cursed ground, and at that moment, the riders felt it, the weight of a land that would not tolerate cruelty any longer. The woman's breath shook, but her eyes did not falter. For years she had been silenced, treated as if her voice held no power. Now, each word she spoke carried the force of the mountains themselves. "You no longer own me," she said again, stronger this time, her voice echoing into the valley. The stepfather's sneer faltered. He had built his power on fear, and now fear was slipping through his grasp like snow melting in the sun. The mountain man stepped forward, towering between her and the riders. His silence spoke louder than any threat, his steady rifle a promise of protection. But it was not only his presence that shook the stepfather, it was the woman's courage. She was no longer hiding behind him. She was standing beside him. That shift changed everything. The riders began to murmur among themselves. One turned his horse away, muttering that no land was worth the wrath of the mountains. Another followed, their loyalty crumbling like weak timber under the weight of truth. The stepfather cursed, his voice cracking, his hands trembling with rage. He had come expecting obedience, but all he found was defiance from the one he thought would always bow. For the first time, the woman saw him clearly, not as a shadow, not as a monster, but as a man. A broken, bitter man who thrived on cruelty because he feared his own emptiness. The realization steadied her. Shadows, she understood, only live when you let them. And tonight, she was done feeding his darkness. The standoff reached its breaking point. The stepfather, desperate to reclaim the power slipping from his grasp, dismounted and stormed toward the cabin, his hand reaching for the knife at his belt. The woman's heart thundered, but she did not step back. She stood firm, her hands clenched, her breath steady. Behind her, the mountain man lowered his rifle slightly, not to retreat, but to let her decide how this storm would end. The stepfather's steps slowed as he neared her. The firelight revealed the lines of age on his face, the cracks in the mask of dominance he had worn for so long. He barked her name, trying to summon the obedience of the past, but his voice no longer carried the same weight. She lifted her chin, her eyes sharp with resolve. "You will not touch me again." The words cut sharper than any blade, slicing through the chains he had bound her with for years. He lunged, but before his knife could strike, the mountain man's hand shot forward, gripping his wrist with the strength of iron. The stepfather cried out, the knife clattering to the ground. The mountain man shoved him back, not with cruelty, but with the unshakable force of the earth itself. The riders who remained shrank into the shadows, unwilling to face the fury of both man and mountain. The woman stepped closer, her voice steady as she spoke the final truth. Your shadow dies here. The stepfather's eyes darted wildly, searching for control, but he found none. His riders abandoned him, their loyalty scattered like leaves in the wind. He stood alone, a man stripped of power, facing the one he thought would never rise against him. And in that silence, the mountains bore witness. The shadow that had haunted her for years had been broken, not by violence alone, but by the courage to speak, the strength to stand, and the unwavering presence of a man who knew that honor is measured not in words, but in action. The West had tested her, and she had endured. The storm had passed. The stepfather staggered backward into the snow, his breath visible in the freezing air, his pride shattered more than his body. For years he had ruled through fear, convinced that cruelty was strength. Yet here, under the gaze of the mountains, and before the woman he once silenced, he was nothing more than a man stripped of power. His voice, once sharp and commanding, now cracked with desperation. You'll regret this, he hissed, but the words fell hollow, swallowed by the endless wilderness that no longer bowed to him. The woman stood tall, her shoulders squared, her eyes unwavering. She had waited her entire life for this moment, though she had not known it. The shadow that had followed her into the cabin, into her dreams, into every fearful glance over her shoulder, was gone. What remained was a quiet strength, a fire that had been forged in suffering and tested in the mountains. She was not merely surviving anymore. She was free. The mountain man remained silent, his rifle resting at his side. He did not need to speak. His presence alone was enough to ensure that the stepfather understood the futility of pressing further. He had offered the woman shelter, but it was she who had chosen to rise, to stand against the darkness. He looked at her with a flicker of respect in his weathered eyes, knowing the battle had been hers all along. The riders, scattered and ashamed, disappeared into the treeline, leaving their leader abandoned in the snow. The stepfather, panting and defeated, turned his gaze one last time toward the cabin. But there was no victory left for him, no power, no control. He mounted his horse with trembling hands and vanished into the night, carrying with him nothing but the broken weight of his own bitterness. The cabin stood strong against the storm, its lantern burning bright. And inside, for the first time, she breathed without fear. The silence of the mountains was no longer haunted. It was a silence of peace, of survival, of a future that belonged to her at last. When dawn broke, the valley stretched before them in golden light, the snow glittering as if the earth itself was celebrating her victory. The woman stepped outside, the cold air biting her cheeks, but it no longer felt threatening. It felt cleansing, as if every breath was washing away the remnants of her past. The mountains, vast and eternal, stood as witnesses to the truth she had embraced. Shadows only live when you let them. She turned to the mountain man, who was already chopping wood, his movements steady and sure. He did not offer praise, nor did he speak of the night before. He simply continued his work, as if reminding her that life, no matter the storms it weathers, must go on. And yet, in his silence, she understood the message. Strength is not in words, but in the endurance of action. The woman walked to the edge of the ridge, her eyes scanning the horizon. For the first time, the world did not seem like a place waiting to hurt her. It seemed wide, endless, full of promise. The shadow of her stepfather had been left in the snow, unable to follow her into this new day. The cabin was no longer just a shelter. It was a home, a place where she had reclaimed her voice and her life. The mountain man joined her at the ridge, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He spoke only once. The land remembers courage. His words settled deep in her soul, a truth that would guide her for the rest of her days. For the West was not kind, nor forgiving, but it honored those who stood, who endured, who refused to bow to the shadows of cruelty. Together, they turned back toward the cabin, the smoke rising steadily into the morning sky. And though the wilderness would bring new trials, new storms, the woman knew she would face them differently now. For she had learned the greatest lesson the mountains could teach, that freedom is not given. It is claimed, and once claimed, it can never be taken away. The mountains stood silent, their peaks glowing in the early light, as if the land itself had witnessed the triumph that had unfolded in their shadow. What had begun as a story of fear and captivity ended as a testament to endurance and rebirth. The woman who once carried chains of silence now walked freely, her voice her greatest weapon, her spirit her unshakable shield. She had faced the storm of her past, and in doing so, discovered the strength to claim her own future. Her stepfather's cruelty had once seemed endless, a shadow that followed her into every corner of her life. Yet, the wilderness revealed a truth sharper than any blade. Shadows have no power against the light of defiance. In standing her ground, she proved that even the deepest wounds can be transformed into marks of resilience. The West does not erase pain. It teaches you to wield it as strength. The mountain man's role was not to save her, but to remind her that survival is not enough. His silence and presence carved space for her courage to rise. And rise it did. Higher than the peaks, stronger than the storms, louder than the echoes of cruelty. Together, they showed that sometimes freedom is not found in escape, but in the refusal to bow ever again. As the sun spread across the valley, the cabin no longer stood as just a shelter. It had become a symbol, proof that even in the harshest wilderness, peace can be built with courage, and safety can be forged through truth. What was once a hiding place was now the foundation of a new life, one unclaimed by shadows and owned entirely by her. And so, this story leaves us with a question that lingers long after the fire has burned low. When the storms of your past return, will you run or will you stand? If this tale stirred something within you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Let others hear your voice, and let this story spark a conversation worth having. Subscribe to the channel so more stories of courage, survival, and the timeless lessons of the West find their way to you. And if this journey moved you, show your support with a like. It helps keep alive the spirit of stories that remind us all of the strength we carry inside.